say what you will about the Puritans, they were having a lot of sex.
Right. Well, and
they had a lot of children.
the irony isn't, it's not even that hard to see that when sex is difficult to attain, it is fantastically rewarding.
Mm-hmm.
And what we've done is we've turned it into, it's junk sex, the equivalent of junk food. It's just not that good, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, no, it's not a surprise that that is interfering with people's motivation.
Mm-hmm.
I will also say that porn is playing a role here that I think we need to highlight, because it is distorting what people think sex is in a way that is most harmful.
Yeah, definitely. And again, this is something porn that, and I'm not like some huge anti-porn person, I don't think yet, but it is something that I've heard from men when I was working at Playboy. They struggle with it. It affected their marriages. It affected their relationships. It affected their relationship to their own sexuality. And it's obviously affecting women. Women are having terrifying sexual interactions where they're getting choked or spanked or all these things that guys think are normal because they've been watching porn, and or women are doing these things because they feel like they need to, which is even more upsetting because that's what's expected. And I mean, talk about another clusterfuck, but it does seem like what's interesting to me, though, about porn is that, you talk about sex kind of being this motivator for human progress, and the internet itself evolved around sex.
Sex and cat videos. All right, I'm going to take a crack at trying to turn you into a vehemently anti-porn person. And I heard you loud and clear, and I think why you are reluctant to go there. But I also think this is one of these cases where the solution is staring us more or less in the face, and we just don't see it because we've been traumatized by what happens when you begin to explore the question of whether porn might not be all right. Right? You, of course, get accused of all kinds of things. Well, censoriousness and prudishness and all of the usual attacks. Let me just say, for my own part, I've had to figure out how to navigate this topic with my two sons, who, of course, encounter this stuff in the world, and they are, of course, 16 and 18, and so they're also trying to figure out sexuality, and this worries me a ton. In fact, I think it is fair to say that I would be less troubled. I would be thoroughly troubled, but I would be less troubled if my kids ended up in trouble with heavy drugs than addicted to porn. That I think it's that dangerous. But here's what I think we're missing, is that because we've been told that pornography is not definable. I don't know what pornography is, but I know it when I see it. That when we say there's something wrong with porn, we are actually saying it's not okay to have erotic content.
Right.
Which I don't think is true at all. So I draw the following distinction. I think erotica is an ancient, valid, and important form, and I don't want to see anything block the erotic exploration.
Yeah.
That said, some of it may be in bad taste, some of it may be destructive, but it is a valid form. That the thing that makes pornography different, the way that we should mentally define it, even if it's difficult in practice to utilize this definition, is that when profit is the motive that has caused the particular piece of content to be produced, that's porn, right? So in other words, erotica is art.
Right.
Pornography is an economic phenomenon.
Yeah, I mean,
And
I definitely have struggled and run into this on my own as I'm being called out by men's rights activists. Even just today before we got on, somebody posted a picture that I had posted of me and like not naked. It was like in lingerie, being like you saying something to someone about how they didn't get to define me. And I, as if they were like, this is the same person who wrote this slut piece, but I'm like, I don't, that's so a separate thing entirely for me. That wasn't my behavior of sleeping with men is different than my like tasteful nudes that I put out into the world, and wasn't even, it was just like my own exploration of my sexuality, etc. Another awkward conversation I'll have to have in the future, but I don't feel the same way when I see that picture. I don't feel ashamed. I was like, damn, I looked amazing.
well, so I would say, what you've just suggested about your motivation for producing it suggests it falls very clearly on the erotic side and not the pornography side.
There's a space, there has to be a space for, sensuality and the erotic, and we can't just like cut that out. And I think this is what gets hard when you start talking about porn, is like you said, you want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, which means all eroticism and sensuality and femininity even gets just tossed out with the idea of porn.
Well, so let me describe why I think the economic fact, why does it matter whether it was produced for money or as an artistic exploration? Well, here's why. I know very little about the porn industry, in fact, almost nothing, but you've got however many companies competing for the sexual attention of however many consumers. And they're all selling the same thing, right? They're selling images and presumably mostly video of people having sex.
Right. Or it's cam girls or live interactions.
Yep. I mean, I know nothing about this landscape. I know very little. I know what a cam girl is, but I will say maybe let's put that aside, because although I still think the same definition applies, there's obviously something distinct when you have a person selling their own video directly to a consumer, right? In other words, there's a gray area surrounding the amateur stuff, right?
I'm aware of it.
Okay, well, good. Maybe you'll tell me about it at some point. But anyway, my point would be this. Let's say that let's step back into a slightly earlier era where we're talking about pornographic videos being made by some number of companies and being sold in whatever mechanism, whether it's downloads or video stores or however it was done. Well, they're all selling the same thing, right? Attractive people having some kind of sex. That's a difficult market to win in. The way you win in that market is with something extreme.
Right.
Or
Escalating.
Edgy. Right. And so the point is, you've got an arms race between producers of pornography for extreme, weird stuff. Now, here's the really bad consequence of that. Human beings, ancient human beings, learned about sex because privacy wasn't all that effective, right? In other words, kids typically, we know from ethnological research, kids learned about sex because they were living in the same hut as their parents.
Right.
And so the kid is kind of asleep, maybe pretending to be asleep. The parents think the kid is asleep. They have sex. Well, you could say what you want about that, but at the very least, it gives quite an honest portrayal of what sex actually is, right?
Right.
It is what people do.
Right.
Porn, in which the producers have gotten involved in this arms race where they're producing edgier, weirder, crazier, more niche stuff, then feeds into that system where humans are naturally curious about what other people are doing in bed, right? And then pornographers are putting really bad, wrong information into that system, saying, oh, here's what people are doing in bed. And it's all this extreme stuff. And the point is, then a generation that before they had sex was seeing that content thinks it's normal, right? And it explains this world that you're describing. I've heard the same thing from young women who I know, that in part, people are having less sex because they're afraid to go to bed with people. They don't know what kind of monsters will be revealed if they take somebody home. And I don't think that's surprising. I don't think people realize, the idea that choking is normal, that's a normal part of sex. Wow, how did this generation get that idea? Or hitting or any of the other stuff. So we're distorting what human sexuality is with pornography because there's an economic problem that pornographers solve with extreme portrayals that then become normalized, right? That is a disaster, right? That is not people looking for sexual content and finding, something honest. That is a dishonest portrayal of sex that is now becoming normal.
Has porn always been, hasn't it always been around there to some degree? Or would you call all things that existed pornographically erotica until it was commodified?
A lot of that, but not perfectly that. No doubt people have been selling. So the problem with my definition, I think my definition is actually the correct definition until you try to instantiate it into a law. And then the question is, well, if money changed hands, is it pornography? And my answer is not necessarily. It could be that you produced something sexual and then got paid for it. Art gets purchased, right? It's not art because somebody paid for it. But the question is, would you have made it absent that motivation? That's really the question. And so, pornography has undoubtedly always been around. My guess is erotica has always been vastly more interesting and more durable than pornography. Pornography is appealing to people's appetites in the moment. But the distortion of sexuality, can I try a concept on you that I'm pretty sure it's somewhere in the neighborhood of right. But anyway, it's a tough one. And the idea is we actually have been sold a wrong concept that sex is something that people can have, right? Like the idea that a person can go out and have sex before we even get to the question of, well, who exactly are they having sex with? That is a distortion of the normal human sexual mode, right? Imagine a world in which you didn't have access to porn, where erotica was painted or drawn pictures, right? And they were snapshots, they weren't moving, right? So a much earlier technological world, your insight, you would know that sex was a thing. You would know what you had heard about it, which would be noisy and unreliable, right? What people say about sex has not been particularly literal or, it's a confusing realm, right? So imagine then that let's put ourselves in the male mindset for a second, okay? There's somebody that for whatever reason is driving you crazy with passionate desire, right? And you work up the courage to invite them to something, and they respond positively. And okay, things develop to the point that whatever point it makes sense to start experimenting sexually with this person, right?
Right.
You're alone. There's nobody there. You don't know a ton about what people do, right? You're just exploring. And the point is, you've now, let's say that this is before there's a permanent relationship, right? And so the woman is very excited by this, but also does not want to produce an offspring until there's a permanent commitment, right?
Yeah.
And so there are limits, and there is, there's tension and all of that, right? And the point is, okay, so you are discovering this realm in which only the two of you exist, right? You are entering some secret space that you two have, some place that you go together. And then you are discovering how to thrill this other person, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then you're not talking about it with anybody, right?
Mm-hmm.
That is a private, it's a private adventure.
Mm-hmm.
It's not the same thing as, oh, person X has sex in this way. This is the thing that gets them off. They like this thing. And that will be true no matter who they're in bed with, right? The other person is basically a prop. Right? That is not a very sexy way for this to unfold. The idea that you and some other person discover your own private sexual landscape, right? That is a very powerful thing, a sexually powerful thing.